everybody on board with Laura Belin, who is an amazing analyst of all things Iowa politics and certainly the Iowa legislature. Laura portrays the legislature increasingly shaped by national politics, executive power, and campaign strategy, often at the expense of transparency, deliberation, and everyday Iowans' needs. Her reporting consistently shows lawmakers governing with one eye on 2026 and the other on Donald Trump. We're going to talk to her primarily about the Iowa legislature, but as those of you who are familiar with this podcast format, any question is fair game for Laura, and I've seen her answer them all. So, Laura, what is your take on the Iowa legislature coming up? What do you think are the surprises? How is it different, going to be different from the last session?
Well, I think it's shaping up to be kind of an interesting year. So, one thing that's different is that Governor Kim Reynolds is a lame duck right now going into the session. So, I do think that she'll have less leverage over the Republican lawmakers than she's had in the past. We also have had some pretty significant leadership changes on both sides. On the Senate side, Jack Whitver, who was the longtime majority leader, he had been the majority leader since 2018, and he stepped down. So now there's a new majority leader, Mike Klimisch, and that led to a little bit of a reshuffle on some of the significant committees over on the Senate side. I don't anticipate really huge changes in how Mike Klimisch runs things, but you never know. There could be some slight differences. On the House side, the number two guy in the House, this is confusing because in the Senate, the majority leader is the top person. But in the House, the Speaker is the top person and the majority leader is the second person. So on the House side, the longtime majority leader, Matt Winchittle, stepped down from that role because he's running for Congress in the 4th District. And that meant that Bobby Kaufman moved up to be House Majority Leader. And at least a half a dozen, I think more than a half a dozen House committees now have new leadership because of that, the knock-on effects from that, plus also Shannon Lundgren, who is running for Congress in the Northeast Iowa District. She has left the position of House Commerce Committee Chair. So in any case, there could be, when the committee chairs have a lot of discretion over what bills get through their committee. And so it can be rather important who's in charge of some of these key committees. So that's one thing I'll be watching. I think that generally speaking, in an election year, the legislature likes to adjourn a little bit earlier because they like to get home and start campaigning. I think that's going to be especially true this year because some of the Republican legislators will have primary challengers. And so the scheduled adjournment date is April 21st. We see that they usually do go into overtime. And I think that the one issue that could push them into longer overtime this year would be property taxes because that is going to be, it's very complicated. It's something Republicans have been promising to do for years. I don't think they can afford to go home empty-handed, and yet it's a really difficult thing to solve. There's not a lot of money in the state budget to help cushion the blow for local government. So I'm not sure, but I feel like there are these cross-cutting pressures where getting to an agreement on property taxes might be quite difficult, but then the legislators really are going to want to get back in their districts and campaign. And one thing that many people aren't aware of is that while the legislature is in session, the campaign committees of the state lawmakers, they can't accept any contributions from PACs.
Ah,
And that's very significant for a lot of the legislators, except for the very top leadership. But in many cases, the majority of what they raise just comes from PACs. And so if they can't accept any PAC donations until after the legislature adjourns, and that primary date is coming up in early June, I think there are going to be a lot of people who are really anxious to be able to get back home and start campaigning. And of course, I will be very interested in following there are interesting primaries on both sides, the Democratic and Republican side, but I think the Republican primaries are going to be especially interesting this year.
so if you could pick three words to describe this upcoming legislature or legislative session, what three words come to mind?
Well, I think the legislature generally is fairly dysfunctional. And I say that even though there is a trifecta, the relationships between the House and Senate Republicans are not good. They haven't been good for a while, and I'm curious to see whether that improves a little bit with the new leadership on the Senate side. But they had a big mess at the near the end of the last session in the Iowa Senate, where they had kind of a wild debate on eminent domain that the leadership didn't want. This was something that, like, nobody I talked to had ever seen anything like this, where a group of rebels was able to force leadership to bring a bill to the floor that they didn't want and then pass a bill that the leadership didn't want. So there's still kind of a lot of messes to clean up there. Then the Governor Reynolds ended up vetoing that bill anyway. So I think that the relationships are a little bit dysfunctional. I do think that the legislature, I mean, it's probably not the worst of the 50 states in terms of transparency, but I do think that there is, generally speaking, a lack of transparency. It's very difficult. It can be difficult for ordinary people to follow what's going on. It can be that the subcommittee and committee meetings, for the most part, are not archived. And so if you don't watch it live, you've kind of missed it and you can't go back and get it later. And so I guess that's another thing. You said three words, though. So now you're putting me on the spot because I'm not sure. I think that it's lopsided would be another word. I mean, the Republican majorities right now are very, very large. The Republican majority in the Iowa House is 67-33, which I think is the largest it's ever been since the late 60s, basically. I mean, since we had a malapportioned legislature. So, and in the Senate, the Democrats did break the supermajority last year through special elections, but it's still a 33-17 Republican majority is very, very large. Like most of our lifetimes, the Senate hasn't been that lopsided. And so the Democrats don't have much ability to get a lot of things done. And so I think that the lopsided nature of it, it just means there's not as much deal making as there would be if, let's say, the Senate were 26-24.
So we have a lot of smart people on this call, many who have served in the legislature and other capacities in state government. I'm going to go to them fairly soon. So those of you who may have a question, please unmute your mic and get ready to roll. Chuck, I'll invite you to lead the parade if you would be so kind. Okay. Chuck, your mic is off, but somebody else's is on. So Chuck, can you
Looks like Chuck is still muted.
Chuck, you're still muted, so I'm going to go to John Schmidt. Do you have a question or a comment for Laura? And then I'm going to go to the members of the Iowa Writers Collaborative.
Thanks, but I'll pass. I'm sure others have better questions.
Okay. All right, Barry Pyatt, do you have a question? Barry Pyatt writes Behind the Curtain, column for the Iowa Writers Collaborative about national politics in the Iowa delegation. Barry?
Well, not so much a question, but as an observation. I spent some time working for members of Congress in the Senate from North Dakota. And if you want to take a look at the future of Iowa with a lopsided legislature like this and lopsided state politics, look to North Dakota. I mean, they have just, in North Dakota, they've practically systematically dismantled most of the machinery of democracy. I know that's kind of a strong statement. But for example, if a legislator dies in office, they changed it so that the Republican committee chooses their successor.
Oh, wow.
Now, how democratic is that? And the other observation I would make, and Laura, tell me if I'm right in terms of my recollection of history here, but we've had lopsided legislatures in Iowa before, and you mentioned that when it was when we malapportioned, but the Democrats a majority at one time. And what I remember from those days is we did things like create community colleges. We did really good things for the state with those authorities. And I don't see any of that happening with the Republicans. They're on the MAGA warpath, as far as I can tell. Would you agree with that?
the other thing, and I wasn't following it in the 1970s, but just from what I've learned about the way the legislature functioned, I mean, there have been Republican trifectas at various times, but the legislature didn't just do everything that the governor wanted or everything significant that the governor wanted. And also, Bob Ray, I mean, he didn't impose, and when they developed the collective bargaining bill, they had a Republican trifecta, but he didn't try to ram through like the most disadvantageous system that they could possibly scrape together a majority vote for. They pulled together stakeholders to try to get a kind of reasonable compromise. And I don't, people who were in the legislature in the 90s can speak to this better than I can. But in 2018, I interviewed Ron Corbett, who was the Republican House Speaker for a time during the 1990s in Iowa. And he briefly was running for governor. Then he kind of crashed out and didn't qualify for the ballot in that 2018. But he was talking about how when they did a tax cut, like he saw it as a benefit if they could make some compromises and get a lot of Democrats on board and then get like 65 or 70 votes in the Iowa House for the tax bill. He viewed that as better than trying to go the kind of Newt Gingrich approach of, or Kim Reynolds approach of, what's the most extreme thing that I can get 51 people in the Iowa House to vote for. And I've been told by many people that the both in both chambers that used to be much more open to amendments from the opposition party. There used to be just much more real discussion in committees rather than, and even floor debate rather than everything being a foregone conclusion the way it is now. I mean, you basically almost never see the minority party get an amendment added to a bill now, which I've been told was not the case for many decades.
Okay, I'm going to go to Chuck and then I'm going to go to Ralph Rosenberg, but I'm going to insert something here, and that is something I'm extremely excited about and proud of, is that the Iowa Writers Collaborative members, Dave Price and Laura Belin, will be joining Kathy Obradovich of Iowa Capitol Dispatch in a podcast to cover what's going on in the legislative session. And if we get enough paid subscribers, we'll continue through the fall 2026 election cycle. This one requires some production costs, so if you want to help out with that, please do. That's the end of my commercial. Now, Chuck Offenberger, hello.
Thanks, Julie. Hi, Laura, and everybody else. Thanks for tuning in today. The that your point that you just made, Julie, about that podcast coming up, I'm excited to think about that because it deals with the question I was just going to ask. This supports the idea of thank goodness for Laura Belin and her interest in the legislature and Iowa politics, because my question is, how many fewer people are covering the legislature and state government? And I think this may even be worse in the covering the agencies of the state government than in the legislature itself. What is this? What's the reduced amount of coverage that citizens of Iowa are getting about state government now compared to maybe when you first started into this?
Well, I know it's less. I mean, it in the 80s, I think the Register some days used to have 4 or 5 people down there. I think sometimes they'd have 2 people covering the Iowa House and 2 people covering the Iowa Senate. They still have most days, I would say the Des Moines Register usually has a couple of people there. The Cedar Rapids Gazette usually has a couple of people there. I'm kind of holding my breath to see whether under new ownership, whether the Gazette cuts back on their state legislative coverage. I'm a little nervous about that. And then Lee Newspapers has a state house person there. And Iowa Capitol Dispatch, I mean, if we didn't have Iowa Capitol Dispatch, there would be almost no coverage of some of the state agencies right now. That's been quite depleted. The Associated Press used to have, well, they always have one state house reporter there, and they used to pick up a second person during the legislative session. They used to hire a temporary person for 4 or 5 months, and they stopped doing that in 2019. Actually, when I heard in late 2018 that they weren't going to hire a second, I heard 3 things. I heard that William Petrosky was retiring from the Des Moines Register. Joyce Russell was retiring from Iowa Public Radio, and the Associated Press was not going to pick up a second person during the legislative session. And that actually influenced my decision to apply for credentials myself because I had always thought about that as something that I would do someday when my kids were older. And then I realized, wow, there are going to be fewer people. This was before Iowa Capital Dispatch was started. So I thought there aren't going to be as many people, and I'm going to have to spend a lot more time down at the State House. And if I'm going to be down there, I might as well have a place to work. So little did I know that I would then embark on this like 5-year adventure of not of fighting for credentials, which I wasn't expecting. But in any case, the press corps down there is pretty depleted. I mean, Iowa Public Radio still has someone. Kay Henderson is still there for Radio Iowa. And they actually, some days, Iowa Public Radio has a couple of people there, depending on what's going on in the subcommittees. But I mean, I'm often having to try to like make trades with other reporters when there are different subcommittees happening at the same time, where I'll say, like, I'll share my audio from this subcommittee if you can share what happened at this other subcommittee. That's one of the issues I have with the subcommittee meetings not being recorded and archived. It's very frustrating. In Minnesota, you could just go and look online and you could watch the recording later of any subcommittee that you wanted. So, but it is a problem. And I'm excited. Dave and Kathy and I really enjoy doing the Iowa Down Ballot podcast. And even though we cover some of the same issues related to the legislature and the elections, the campaigns and elections, it's much more of a freewheeling discussion. And we usually kind of dig into a smaller number of topics compared to the radio show that I do for KHOI Radio, which is 30 minutes. And we really try to pack as much news as we possibly can into the 30 minutes. So I kind of enjoy both formats.
And
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And let me say, Iowa is the only state providing this kind of coverage through Substack. I'm so proud of that. Ralph Rosenberg,
Thank you. Thank you very much. And good afternoon. Now, when I started and through the 80s, Iowa Public Radio would cover live debate on both the House and Senate side, and they would be there every day. And as Chuck mentioned, or as Laura mentioned, a lot of the media outlets had separate staff on both the Senate and the House side. Media would fill the benches, if you know what I mean by the benches behind the legislature. And so that Chuck's right, what Laura does and Capital Dispatch does is of expanded importance, because the social media, for its importance and for podcasts and Substacks, doesn't meet those needs. And what I end up telling people to do is subscribe to individual advocacy groups. Like my former Iowa Environmental Council puts out weekly newsletters keeping people up to speed, because they're not going to get that anymore from the Register. That's one. Second thing, I was first elected with Bob Ray as a governor, and I was in the minority.
Mm-hmm.
And not only did they take my amendments, I floor managed bills when I was in the minority.
Yeah, that's wild. I've heard of that happening.
So it's important to keep that in mind. So, because I think that that's important to help figure out going forward what we can do. And then in the, I served in the 80s and 90s, but later on I lobbied on civil rights and environment. And we would get a lot more bipartisan. And I'm still trying to figure out why we didn't get bipartisan. For example, Governor Branstad signed progressive legislation in the 80s because I was the floor manager, both on LGBT issues and environmental issues. He was the governor. Now, we had Democrats in the House and Senate, but he could have vetoed all that. And we would not have had the numbers to overturn the vetoes.
Mm-hmm.
So something has changed in the last 20 years, and I don't know for sure what it is. But the characterization of the legislature today is absolutely right, that for a number of years now, the Republicans say we're not going to take any kind of Democratic amendment. And the chill on that is some of the legislators tell me they don't even want to bother filing amendments to educate the public, or filing bills to at least educate the public, because they aren't going to go anywhere. So that's a little bit of history. But my looking forward is, I think existing legislators could do a lot more by filing amendments or issuing statements to educate the public and advocate. So for example, we could do SNAP. Iowa legislature can debate putting more money into SNAP, and people can, the amendments can fail. So I'm kind of curious what Laura thinks about can't legislators at least help educate and advocate?
Yeah, I agree with that. I've seen a trend in the last few years of the opposition party offering fewer and fewer amendments. And I think it's kind of unfortunate because I enjoy when I'm covering those debates, I think it is helpful to have the Democratic amendments there. And sometimes they're ruled not germane, so you don't ever get an up or down vote on the amendment. But a lot of times you do get a vote. Now, I will say that late last spring, because Jennifer Conforst is running for Congress, she stepped down as the Iowa House Minority Leader. And I got the strong impression from Brian Meyer in the first press conference he did with us after he was elected that I got the impression that the House Democrats will be offering more amendments this year than what we've seen for the past few years. I don't know about the Senate side, but I feel like on some of the bills, yeah, I've wondered like why we don't see more opposition amendments. I feel that way as well. And I think one thing that I hear consistently from people who served in the legislature in the 80s and 90s and maybe less so the 2000s is there's just much less socializing. There are fewer friendships across party lines. I mean, the women of the Iowa House and Senate used to have a regular Wednesday lunchtime meeting that they did for many, many years. It seems to have stopped sometime maybe around 2000 or in the early 2000s. And you just don't have the relationships. You don't see the relationships. And I'm not saying that there aren't Democrats and Republicans who are friendly with each other, but it's definitely not like it was back in the day when people have told me that people were just more cordial, and it meant that they were more willing to listen and negotiate on some of the legislation. And yeah, it's so interesting. I need to at some point write something about like interview a few people who are able to floor manage bills as members of the minority. I think Herman Kornbach told me that Amy Sinclair, who's now the Iowa Senate president, that when the Democrats had the majority in the early 2010s, that he let her floor manage a bill as a member of the minority that was an education related bill. But I don't know. She probably wouldn't agree to talk to me about it. So
And another thing I'd like to insert is that I don't want anybody not to subscribe to the Des Moines Register. We need to support them.
yes.
They are doing the best they can with corporate ownership. And I had a couple of comments in here. Mary McCarthy says the Gazette and Lee Enterprises do have journalists focused on the Iowa legislature. Gazette has a podcast every week. She just got an email about it. So true. Courtney Crowder.
Yeah, I subscribe to the Cedar Rapids Gazette and the Des Moines Register.
Sure.
So I encourage people to do that.
Me too. And Courtney says the Register has 3 reporters assigned to the legislature during session and 2 full-time all year round. And let's see, Susan Beckman says, can we blame the Heritage Foundation? Now, Lowell Norland is on the call. Lowell, sometimes we have trouble with your audio. But in the chat, he's a former legislator. He says he handled the last property tax bill, 1977. He said, we worked hard to have a bipartisan bill. It passed the House 80-20, and the Senate with 26 votes, which were lots of Republican votes. And Governor Ray made calls to the Republican members asking them to vote for the bill. So that was then, this is now. Now it's hard to sometimes get directors of state divisions to return phone calls to the press or the public for that matter.
I see a couple of other questions in the chat. Do you want me to just take
Yeah.
some of those?
Oh,
So
ahead.
Susan Beckman asks, can we blame the Heritage Foundation and Koch for writing the legislation for all Republican states? So I have a little bit of a contrarian opinion on this. It is true that there are model bills that come from ALEC or Americans for Prosperity that come from other states. However, I think that some people on the left kind of overhype this. I see a lot of really pernicious legislation that comes from, let's say, the Iowa Farm Bureau, the Iowa Association of Business and Industry, the governor's area education agencies thing. That wasn't some national group pushing that. So I think we have a lot of very bad homegrown ideas. And it is true that some things like school vouchers, I mean, there's a national infrastructure that pushes for certain types of bills, destroying collective bargaining. Yes, that was certainly something that was modeled that a lot of Republican controlled states did. But I think that we see a lot, and the pesticide immunity bill is another one where the Bayer Monsanto Corporation has been pushing that legislation, versions of that all across the country whenever there's a Republican controlled state. So I don't want to discount that, but I also don't think that all model bills are bad. I mean, the ACLU might have good model legislation that they've enacted in whatever Massachusetts or Minnesota. And so I don't think that just because something is a model bill means it's automatically bad. And I do think that there are some local, I mean, the family leader is another one that is just generates some pretty bad legislative ideas. So yeah, I would say the Americans for Prosperity, definitely a powerful lobby group that I don't often agree with up there. But I don't think that most of the bad legislation is just coming from these national groups.
The Democratic Party has overperformed in some of these special elections. Do you think that'll have any kind of impact on this session?
Well, I definitely, at least one thing in the Iowa Senate, the Democrats now have the numbers to vote down some of the governor's appointees. And I expect them to use that power pretty sparingly, just based on what happened during the many years that I covered the legislature when there was no supermajority. And we usually only saw a handful of nominees go down. But for instance, I mean, if the Democrats had had 17 seats in the last couple of years, there are several people who wouldn't have been confirmed to the Board of Regents. Mackenzie Snow, who was totally unqualified, would not have been confirmed as director of the Department of Education. So there could be some edge cases here where the Democrats are able to block some of that. But I don't know, it's hard to know how much importance to assign to a special election result, compared to going into next November. I will say that this latest special election that happened in the western suburbs of Des Moines, where it was a Democratic hold, I think that that could be very important just because it showed that the Polk County Democrats have a very well organized turnout machine. And if I were Zach Nunn, I'd be extremely worried about that. But both of the other Iowa Senate seats that Democrats flipped, the one in Sioux City and the one in Clinton County, I mean, those are both going to be on the ballot in November. I don't know who the Republican candidates are going to be for those. I anticipate those could be somewhat difficult holds, but we'll see what happens. I think they'll both be competitive seats.
Okay. Well, we have some folks on the call here, almost 50, and I'd love to engage you if you have a comment or a question. I'm just trying to look here to see if I see any fellow members of the Iowa Writers Collaborative right this minute.
I see another question. Diane Pritchard wants to know where her Republican friends are getting their news regarding legislation. What is their version of Iowa Capitol Dispatch? There really isn't one. The main conservative website that covers the legislature is Jacob Hall, the Iowa Standard. And, his coverage can actually sometimes be useful because he does go and record, he videotapes some of the subcommittees. And so sometimes you can see them on his Facebook page, but he's not doing the kind of rigorous reporting. And he's a very, very strong, like MAGA social conservative voice. So you're not at all getting any kind of balanced coverage. I mean, like, I have a point of view in my reporting, but I'm like really scrupulous about trying to be accurate and at least present what the other side's arguments are, which is something I don't really see happening on the Iowa Standards website a lot of times. So they don't have, and I forgot to second what Ralph said earlier. If there's some set of issues that you're interested in, definitely sign up for the newsletter of whether it's the Iowa Environmental Council or Iowa Safe Schools or One Iowa or the Iowa Library Association or whatever it is, because some of these groups will have action alerts. Sometimes a bill pops up and you have very little time to react. Like it'll show up on the website and the subcommittee is the next day. And so to find out when things are going to come up and when you can weigh in and make sure that you can email or call your legislators in time, like it is very important to sign up for the newsletters for some groups like that.
Laura, what are some of the newsletters you sign up for personally?
for the Iowa legislature. I
Mhm.
mean, I pretty much read everything that everybody, I read everything that the Des Moines Register and Gazette and Lee newspapers and Iowa Public Radio and Radio Iowa, the Iowa Capital Dispatch. So I try to keep an eye on that. I mean, I'm always trying to look for angles where I can cover it a little bit differently because I don't feel like it's a good use of my time or my readers' time to just repeat what's in everybody else's reporting. So for like the radio show, I'm often looking for maybe an obscure bill that people didn't notice or a subcommittee that other people didn't attend. I do I do listen to the On Iowa Politics podcast as well. I mean, I'm not really the target audience for it because I'm very immersed in everything that's happening. So, but I think it is. I just try to get news from as many sources as possible. And I even listen to the podcast of the Family Leader. It can be kind of informative. I don't agree with them on probably almost anything, but they sometimes have a heads up when something is going to be coming up or going to be debated soon. And so I hear about it on their podcast. So I do try to listen to lots of different sources.
Who are some of the most respected interest groups that follow what's going on in the legislature?
Respected by whom? You mean by
You.
the legislators or
But
by me? Oh, I mean, I think a lot of people, a lot of groups are, if they're subject area experts, I mean, I think like the Iowa Environmental Council, the Environmental Law and Policy Center, I think that I can really trust if I don't understand something in a bill. The ACLU of Iowa, I mean, if I don't have a clear understanding of what a bill would do, then, their lobbyists can often explain it. But I mean, I think that a lot of times the lobbyists, I mean, yes, they're representing a client's interest, but particularly the lobbyists who aren't representing large numbers of clients, but like, let's say the group, the Iowa Association for Justice or the Iowa State Bar Association, which both represent lawyers in different ways. I mean, they can at least explain certain things that are in some of the justice system related bills. And I even like the League of Cities or the Iowa Association of Counties. I mean, I often don't agree with the positions they take on a bill, but I think that their analysis of what's in the bill is usually pretty on target. So I do try to sometimes I ask them if there's something, and I'll certainly be asking them about whatever property tax thing comes up because their staff will be much more on top of what the details are than probably a lot of the legislators. I mean, one thing I've learned is that a lot of the legislators don't have a firm grasp on what's in a lot of the bills. They're kind of going by what, I mean, you couldn't keep up with all the hundreds of bills yourself anyway, but a lot of times they're going by what somebody told them in caucus, which may or may not be accurate.
what's the impact of the school voucher program now? Are people waking up to what it's meaning for public schools around the state? Or is that a going to be an issue for next year?
Well, it's kind of hard to say what people are feeling about anything because we don't really have much public polling about anything with Ann Seltzer no longer doing polls for the Des Moines Register. We really haven't had any. I'm sure that a lot of the campaigns and political committees are doing polling on a lot of different issues, but in terms of a public poll about what Iowans think, what people's approval ratings are, what do they think about the abortion ban, what do they think about school vouchers, I have no idea. I mean, I don't think we have any data. I think that school districts are going to increasingly every year, more school districts are going to be hurt by the voucher bill. And we see new private schools are expanding. We see new private schools popping up. So I think it's just going to be a continuing huge problem. But I don't have any idea. I don't have the data to say whether people are more upset about it or not.
Susan Beckman, what do you think? Are people more upset about it in Burlington?
Well, the groups that I am connected with directly, absolutely yes. Our Blue Women's Group and our League of Women Voters. I think that the Iowa League of Women Voters, I don't participate a lot at the state level, but I do think that that's one of their topics of concern is the voucher program.
Oh, they have an email list as well, the League of Women Voters. So
Yeah.
they're following
League
a lot of the bills
really,
too.
yeah, they do. And so the restriction being that we're bipartisan, so it can't be a partisan issue, but you can defend public education as a state, a reason for our state having once led the country. So I guess I'm not really in touch with people that are staunchly right wing. I'm just not. And on the other hand, so I think it's Taylor Collins, the people that have been elected from Southeast Iowa are very poor quality. That's all I can say. I mean, it looks to me as though they were just recruited and groomed, and they're told what to say and they follow the line, and there's no independent thinking on their part. And there's no response to the people that live in their districts.
A lot of the younger Republican legislators were political staffers. So Taylor Collins worked on the staff in the governor's office. Austin Harris was a campaign staffer for Marionette Miller Meeks and then worked on her congressional staff. The newest one, Blaine Watkins, who was elected in a special election from Lee County, was a clerk. A number of them clerked for state legislators. So they do like to bring in people who are sort of steeped in the system and won't really challenge anybody. So you definitely don't see in the Iowa House, when you see like a handful of Republicans voting against something, it's very rarely one of the younger Republicans. It's usually, if there are independent minded Republican legislators, they tend to be a little bit Gen X or older, in my experience.
Well, also they are not invested. They have not paid into the communities. They're not invested in our communities. They're not invested in rural Iowa. And honestly, they've been just brainwashed. They've been fed the information. They don't have any experience as to what the effects of the bills are, the legislation is on communities. And that's typically an age thing, unless you're in the groups that are really targeted. And they don't even want to talk about that. I mean, we have done repeated outreach to try to get them to talk to us, and they just don't find it worth their time.
Okay, Martha Wolf, let's bring it.
I have a couple of comments. I will say that with Blaine Watkins, our former mayor in Fort Madison is running as a Democrat. And I think he's going to be, he's been on the Board of Supervisors and has been mayor recently in Fort Madison. I think he'll run a pretty strong campaign.
I didn't see, did he announce what? I didn't see the announcement.
Yes, he has.
I need to add that to my
list. Come on, Laura, for Southeast Iowa. My other thing is, the money kind of fell apart last year for the Republicans in terms of the money coming in and having to use some rainy day funds. Do you see the same? I would think that would impact property tax. Property tax bill.
They're in dire straits. So we're going to be spending this current budget year, we're going to be spending more than $1 billion more than the expected state revenue. And they haven't finalized the budget for next year, but it's definite that we're going to be in a deficit spending for several years. There's absolutely no way that revenue for the coming year will match what they want to spend. So they're pulling money from the accumulated surplus and from what they call the taxpayer relief fund. And one of my guest authors, John Muller, who used to work for the Legislative Services Agency and was even a revenue estimator for a time, he wrote an outstanding piece kind of explaining why. The surplus came from the huge infusion of federal funding during the pandemic. And instead of using that intelligently for things, the Republicans just kind of stockpiled, built up this massive surplus, and then cut income taxes and corporate taxes way too deeply. And we're going to be just kind of like eating into this surplus and reserve funds, but it's going to hit a wall probably by 2028 or 2029. And I think that very few Republicans legislators have any clue that this is really going to happen. Because at least, I don't know what they think privately, but they'll say, the revenue is projected to start rising again in 2027. Well, first of all, I don't believe that. But even if it did, we're way down. We're way in the hole. And we could have a recession. We know that the federal funding for SNAP and Medicaid is going to be on a downward slide because of this budget reconciliation bill that they just passed. So that's a hole that the state is going to need to fill. And I think that was one of the problems with the property tax reform is you connected those dots because in one of the bills that was floated last year that it never got to the floor or anything, but there was this idea that the state would provide $400 million to school districts to kind of make up for the school districts losing some of their property tax authority or something. Well, that money, we just don't have that money. And part of the reason we don't have it is because they cut taxes too much. They accelerated the drive to a flat tax. And part of the reason is now we're going to be spending $350 million a year on school vouchers. So, and that's escalating every year. That is guaranteed to escalate, the voucher money. So, yeah, with the budget situation, I mean, I don't believe this, but there's a conspiracy theory out there that, like, one reason the Republican field for governor is fairly weak is that everybody's like, oh yeah, the budget's going to crash and let's blame it on Rob Sand. It's like I don't think that that's what's happening. But honestly, it's something if Rob Sand does manage to win the governor's race, it's something he's going to really have to contend with because the budget will completely fall apart and Republicans will try to pin it on him.
Well, Mike Owen always said they do a tax cut, but then they never wait a couple of years to see how that impacts the budget.
Correct.
I mean,
Oh, it was very clear that even when they did the tax cuts, that they were cutting it too deeply and going to a flat tax, it just, I mean, part of it was that the governor is very competitive. She wanted to be whatever she wanted Iowa to be at a certain place in the rankings of, and now they're trying to lock in these tax rates. There's a constitutional amendment two constitutional amendments that will likely be on the ballot this coming November that would make it much harder to dig out of the hole. Because one of them would require a supermajority to raise income taxes or corporate taxes. And the other one would say that Iowa, like it would put in the Constitution that we have to have a flat income tax. So basically, you could never dig out of it by going back to a progressive tax system. And because you would basically never get a supermajority for raising income taxes, it means at some point they'll just be raising sales and use taxes more and more, which are the most regressive taxes there are. And I mean, it's just the fiscal mismanagement. This piece by John Mueller, I really recommend it highly. And maybe Julie, I'll send it to you. So when you send this out, maybe you can put it like in the show notes to get a sense. I thought that I had a handle on how bad our budget situation was, but he has a bunch of graphs that really bring it into relief. Like they just can't get out of this thing. I mean, there's a lot of wishful thinking.
And by the way, Ed Tibbetts had a good column this last week about the Constitution.
Oh yeah, you should be reading Ed Tibbetts if you're not already. Along the Mississippi, that's essential reading for me.
Really?
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Anybody else? Carl Schilling, do you want to weigh in here? Lowell Norland, do you want to see if you can get your mic on, or should we just pass you by? I'd love to get your input, Lowell. No? Okay, you did it. Oh, no, you didn't. Yeah, I think it's your headset. I'm sorry, Lowell. We'll just have to figure this out one of these days. Carl Schilling, your mic's off too. And while you get your mic on, I'm going to ask Laura a question about Randy Feenstra as well as the rest of the group. Is he out in the state campaigning? Has anybody seen him or seen evidence that he's been in your area? We got people from all corners of Iowa right now. Have you seen Randy Feenstra? Where's the wanted post?
He's possibly been in your area, but you probably haven't seen him because if you look at his social media, it is absolutely hilarious. He is doing these events and he's getting like 12 or 15 or 18 or 20 people at his events
Really?
in big cities. He's basically his campaign is trying not to have a high turnout. And Althea Cole, who is the conservative columnist for the Cedar Rapids Gazette, wrote a pretty devastating column maybe a week or two ago about she went to his event in Cedar Rapids which was at a pizza ranch, and there were 14 people there in Cedar Rapids, a city of 100,000 or whatever. And she said she only was informed about it the day before. His campaign just, I mean, I think that they're just trying to kind of hide out and hope that he can skate through the primary on having more money and name recognition. I don't know. It's wild to me. And I mean this literally, that the Windsor Heights and Clive Democrats get more people at their monthly meetings than I see at these Randy Feenstra meet and greets on his social media. It's
Okay.
comical.
John Schmidt, you're ready to roll? Go ahead.
Back to property tax for a moment. There's been a task force working on this, on a proposed legislation that includes local government leaders. Laura, are you familiar with that group and where they're at as far as what they're proposing when the legislature begins?
I don't know. No, I don't know the details of what they're proposing.
I don't either.
Oh,
No, I mean, I think everyone's kind of, I mean, one of the issues I think I mentioned that there has been a bit of a reshuffle on the House side, but Bobby Kaufman, who is now the House Majority Leader, used to be the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. So he was one of the main people working on this property tax issue last year, and I'm sure he'll still have input on it. But now there's a brand new House Ways and Means chair, Carter Nordman. So I feel like that makes it even more difficult for them to come to some agreement because he wasn't immersed in it last year the way Bobby Kaufman was.
so Laura, it seems to me there's been a narrative shift to focus on water quality and high cancer rates in Iowa, at least in the general populace, in terms of talking about this issue. Do you see that reflected at all in this upcoming session?
I think among a lot of Iowans, it is a growing issue. I know when I've been to town halls, whether it's Rob Sand or other candidates for other offices, it's something people bring up all the time. But I don't see Republicans talking about it. It never seems to be an issue that Republican legislators name as one of their top priorities to work on. And I just don't get a sense that that is on their agenda. I mean, there is a new chair of the Iowa House Agriculture Committee because of the former chair Mike Sexton left the legislature to take a job in the Trump administration, USDA. But I don't know, there seems to be a lot of denial. I mean, I feel like the Mike Nag, Iowa Secretary of Agriculture, Mike Nag, is like, we're doing a lot, we're doing these projects and they're working. And I think there's a strong desire to believe that it's working. So I don't see a lot of the urgency. I know that it's something that a lot of Democrats care about, though.
Okay. Who else has a question or a comment? Bill Stapleton, I see you're on the call. Come on in, join the call.
I wrote a couple of years ago, I think it was now a couple of sessions ago, the Iowa House Environmental Protection Committee almost never even meets. They have very few meetings, so let alone to consider bills about protecting the environment. Last year, they had a meeting to try to push a conspiracy theory bill about chemtrails out of their committee. So that's kind of where we are.
And
Sorry, go ahead,
I
Carl.
have a dumb question for some of my friends on the call who are involved in agriculture. Is the DNR's position of just sort of let avian flu take over these flocks of geese and all that sort of thing? Is that an okay policy, or should there be something going on to try and mitigate avian flu? I have no clue, but if anybody on this call has an opinion about it, I'd love to hear from you. But Bill, that's not what I'm expecting you to talk about.
Actually, I was gonna bring something up about that. I believe that so California did some sort of a deal where they're banning or they're not taking Iowa poultry because well, I know that Randy Feenstra was like for mass vaccinations of all of the flocks. But the problem with that is that if there's a weakened bird that also gets the avian flu, and then the virus basically gets around the vaccine, and then you've got a compromised population there, then the vaccine becomes basically worthless because did everybody follow that? I'm sorry. I kind of explained that in a really roundabout way, but basically the virus learns to get around the vaccine that the sick bird has been given, and therefore it propagates and then is spread. And so I know that Feenstra is for vaccination. I'm not sure about Hinson, Miller Meeks, or none, but I know that Feenstra at least was all for that, mass vaccinations. Um, I know that they prefer they the tried and true thing is to let the sick birds get sick, and then they are able to easily identify, a sick bird so that it's not obfuscated by this vaccine that's given to them in unison. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, it does. What I don't understand is how we have a flock of geese who are dying of avian flu right at the Moffat Reservoir, which is a backup for the Des Moines water supply. Is that something that needs to be uh, brought to wider attention than it already is? I don't know the answer to that, and I don't expect you to cover it, Laura. I'm just curious.
I don't know. I will say that the vaccine skepticism is really on the rise, and I expect to see more bills every year. I mean, last year there were several bills on that. Some of them didn't get out of committee, but I expect them to be reintroduced and maybe even more. There were just, it kind of shows up in subtle ways on some of the bills and certain amendments, but I worry a lot. If we have another pandemic, we're in so much trouble because the majority party won't even, I mean, their position is that everybody did too much with COVID and they should have done less. I still wear a mask when I'm at the Capitol because it's, I mean, it's terrible ventilation and people are coming from all over the states and I can't afford to get sick during the legislative session. I don't really have any backup. So I'm one of the very few people I ever see wearing a mask at the State House.
And you should wear a mask because we're dealing with and um, the influenza, COVID. Oh Laura, help me with the name of the woman that does the curves the
Oh,
ground.
Sarah Ann Willett.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, actually, I haven't been keeping up with her website. She doesn't live in Iowa anymore, but I think she still tracks things in Iowa. They don't release as much data as they used to because I think they stopped releasing the water data which was kind of a proxy for knowing how widespread COVID was. But frankly, I mean, I can't even afford just to get like a regular cold or flu during the legislative session because if I'm wiped out for a week, I mean, it's just I miss too much. So yeah, it's always interesting to see how people react to me down there with my mask. So
Barb,
not not
Barb,
everyone is.
Barb Madden Biddle has an interesting topic to bring up. She says, I wonder what the rating agencies are saying about the quality of Iowa municipal bonds. Relying on surplus funds is a red flag.
Oh yeah, I think that in the future we are going to see downgrades for Iowa as a state and maybe the municipal. That's a great question. I don't know what they're saying, but I mean, people can see that our fiscal situation is not good. And our economy is not good. Moody's did an analysis that we're among, there's a group of states where they say are either already in a recession or close to recession, and we're one of those states.
Absolutely. All right, Bob Leonard, I see you've joined the call. I like to call on you if you have any Oh, there's Liz Garst. Hi, Liz. Good to see you. We're chatting with Laura Belin about the upcoming legislative session. If you have something you'd like to ask or make a comment about, I would love to bring you in, Liz and Bob. Bob, where'd you go? I just lost you off my Hollywood squares. Oh, there you
I'm
are.
here. I'm here. This is a comment. I guess one statement of Laura's before is I found a bunch of dead geese and a dead pelican below Lake Red Rock and called a DNR friend who's a game warden, and he says it's a real problem. It's they're not handling them, they're not processing them, at least in rural areas. They want people to stay away, but the bird flu has been really increasing over the past 3 years, and that he knew of no plans to change what they're doing. But so anyway, we're noticing it. It's all over. We're noticing the larger birds. We don't notice the smaller birds, but he has no specific instructions other than just leave them alone and tell people to stay away.
Liz Garst, do you have an opinion about this?
Not really, other than I think the DNR is doing a good job on advertising this problem as their outlets about the safety hazards involved and making clear they want to be called if it's a significant outbreak.
Okay.
They're at the very least trying to monitor it.
So
I worry about two things about bird flu. One is there's a vaccine, but we won't use it because of Europeans. And so we're risking it evolving into other species. And just my amateur opinion is, boy, there's a lot of corn piles sitting around on the ground that geese can have a nice lunch on and poop on. And I just imagine that's a vector, though I don't know.
I see a question in the chat. I don't want us to run out of time. Ralph asked, is there any chance Reynolds or leaders will propose a sales tax increase to pay for the property tax changes the governor wants and to help balance the budget? That would also impact the funding of what's called IWIL, which is the Water and Land Legacy Trust. I don't think they're going to do that in an election year. I do think that later this decade, they're going to have to raise the sales tax. And my big concern is that they would do that in conjunction with changing the funding formula so that whatever money that we would want, I was always apprehensive about IWIL, the sales tax increase to fund the Conservation Trust, because I was worried about the optics of the environmental movement being at the forefront of lobbying for a regressive tax increase. And now under the Republican trifecta, I'm even more worried because if we ever get the sales tax increase, it probably won't fund the kind of conservation that we want to see. They would change it to fund mostly big ag greenwashing, is my opinion. So, but I think there will be a sales tax increase later this decade because they won't be able to avoid one. And our Constitution is probably going to make it almost impossible to have an income tax increase. But one advantage of, hypothetically speaking, if we had a Democratic governor, you could have some kind of a negotiation of what would happen in exchange for a sales tax increase. Whereas if we continue to have a Republican trifecta, and I still think Republicans are favored in all of the statewide races, even with Randy Feenstra being as weak a candidate as he is. I mean, they'll just raise the sales tax and use it for giveaways to all of the same, school vouchers. I mean, but for instance, Rob Sand wants to put back income caps on the school vouchers. That would be something that if we had divided government again, that would be something that it could at least be negotiated. It might not ever get through, but now we can't, the Democrats can't really do anything. I mean, they can ask for things. The Democrats just this morning proposed their own property tax plan, but I'm sure that whatever bill is brought to the floor is not going to be modeled on the Democratic plan.
So what we've got,
Laura, regards water, the one issue that I think all the environmental groups are coalescing around is to restore and maybe even improve water quality monitoring system. Do you have any specific comments on that or suggestions for political amateurs like me?
I mean, they defunded that. I don't think the money is going to be there. I mean, that was one of the big last minute budget amendments that they had, I think, from a couple sessions ago, that they defunded that water quality monitoring system. I don't know where the money is going to come from to do that. I think if there's some alternate way, I mean, it's very unfortunate, but if there's some alternate way to pay for it besides relying on the state budget, that might be advisable. I don't think Republicans really want the evidence.
What did you say, Liz?
A tax on nitrogen, for example.
Oh, a tax on nitrogen. Yeah, that would be sure. I mean, yes, that's logical, right? A use tax that would be used, but that I cannot see anything like that getting through the legislature as currently construed.
So Laura, if you don't mind staying over a little bit with Liz on the call, I want to ask Liz a question that maybe you can comment on and others. You mind, Liz?
Go ahead.
Okay, Liz has scared the bejesus out of me about topsoil, our vanishing topsoil. Liz, is anybody making any substantive suggestions about how to address that issue? Is the legislature going to be bringing up anything?
Well, the main point I make to people about this is topsoil is being governed above all else by our row crop land use, 75% of our state. And that is governed by the federal farm bill. It's far more a federal issue than a state issue. And the feds have the money to influence behavior, and the state really doesn't have that much money to influence behavior. But there's, all sorts of proposals now around what we can do about water. And of course, I make the point that protecting our soil is doing something about water.
Yeah. Boy, anybody listening to this podcast, if you haven't had a chance to visit White Rock Conservancy and get a lecture from Liz and an informative conversation with Liz Garst about what's going on, I highly recommend it. Do you have any public tours coming up, Liz?
No, but I'm always available for tours for people who want to talk ag policy, I guess.
Okay.
Especially if they're politicians.
Liz, are you endorsing anybody in any of these primaries?
No.
Okay. All right, Laura, you've got the last word here.
Yeah, I'm also not endorsing anybody in any of the primaries. I guess I wanted to invite people if they have expertise or maybe even a memory of how things used to work in the legislature. My door is always open for guest commentaries and columns at Bleeding Heartland. I publish hundreds of those every year, and always interested in that, particularly or if there's a particular bill that you're following, especially if it's a bill that didn't get a lot of attention in the mainstream media. There are always hundreds and hundreds of bills, more than any of us can cover. So I'll also welcome guest posts about those.
Okay, thanks. The Iowa Down Ballot podcast will now be a weekly feature. I think you're going to be recording it on Fridays, probably uploading it Friday afternoon or Saturday morning.
I think the new episode should drop on Saturday morning. And then my KHOI's Capital Week, we record that live on Monday evenings, and I send out so people can find it starting on Monday evenings on their podcast platforms or smart speakers. And then Tuesdays, I send out the audio file and a written recap on my own Substack newsletter, because I know a lot of people don't like to listen. They'd rather read or skim the recap. So
thank you, everybody, for participating in this wonderful discussion. Hooray. Laura
Thank you, Julie.
We'll also be listening to the podcast. Liz, we need you to be a regular on this call. I need your voice. Maybe you can write one of those guest posts for Laura about the Farm Bill and why it's important. We'd love to read your thoughts. Everybody, take care till we meet again.